Alright everybody, thank you for tuning in. We're gonna check out Amber Heard, something a little bit different, and it is wild.
As you sit here with me now, has it sunk in?
How could it? It's surreal and difficult. In part, yes. This has been a long time coming.
Do you stand?
First of all, how pre-planned was that breath? And then how could it? You're going to notice with Amber Heard, she very rarely answers a question directly. She goes off in slightly different directions. She gives resume statements. And it is just unbelievable how wooden she is here. If you look at other interviews, she's very seductive, which is, I think, how she manipulated people. But here she's just very wooden.
And by your testimony and your accusations against Johnny Depp about abuse.
Of course, to my dying day, will stand by every word of my testimony.
The real-life drama.
Notice, did she say it was true? Absolutely not.
Majority of this trial was played out on social media. I think that this trial is an example of that gone haywire, gone amok, and the jury is not immune to that.
You think the jury saw it?
How could they not? I think even the most well-intentioned juror.
So funny. You've seen me, I cover a lot of Harry and Meghan, and we're seeing these patterns here. It's so funny. Blaming the social media now. We've seen the media blamed, now we're here seeing social media blamed. So she went through a court of law. It's found out that she's lied about just about everything. She's committed physical abuse against Johnny Depp. And she's just saying it's social media, it's this, that, and the other. And in this sense, social media can be negative, but this is a time where I think things got it right. It was a pretty terrible thing. I mean, Johnny Depp, he was doing the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. A whole movie franchise was destroyed by her lying, right?
It's been impossible to avoid this.
People online and crowds.
City blocks lined with people holding signs saying, "Burn the witch," "Death to Amber." After 3.5 weeks, I took the stand and saw just a courtroom packed full of Captain Jack Sparrow fans who were vocal, energized.
Can you put into words?
Notice the way she speaks. It's just so, I don't even know how to describe it. So fake. Just so dramatic. Overacting. They had the signs, and there were Captain Jack Sparrow fans. And again, she was blaming so much of it on Johnny Depp. And the thing is she's not mentioning is at first, everyone believed her. I mean, Johnny Depp got canceled. It wrecked his career. If you think it's not just him, lots of camera people were working on those movies. There were producers. There are, assistants. So a lot of people lost jobs because of what she did. So it's just amazing how she's able to twist things, because that was absolutely not the case. Even I look at old interviews of her, and there's really lame guys who are oh my gosh, she's so beautiful, she's right about everything, everyone's evil. It's kind of the opposite. People wanted to believe her, right?
How that felt.
This was the most humiliating and horrible thing I've ever been through. I have never felt more removed from my own humanity.
What does that mean?
I felt less than human.
Let's go back to the day of the...
That was a very false expression. I felt less than human. I can't even do it. But you could see it it's like she rehearsed word for word this interview. And the thing is, she's oftentimes a lot smoother than this, but maybe she's feeling the pressure because so much came out about how much she lied. And it seems like with her, she might not be a narcissist. Maybe she's more like borderline personality disorder, because she herself was erratically abusive and physically abusive. And let's remember, she got the benefit of the doubt for a long time. It was just kind of like justice finally occurred and it came out that it was not true. Because these things do happen. I had a friend that this happened to. You know, he's dating someone. This person would give themselves marks and then go to the police and all say crazy things and use slurs against him, and eventually he was able to film it, and that's how he was able to get out of the situation.
Verdict. Were you feeling confident?
That's a great question. I wish I could say yes to that. I want to say yes to you, but it wouldn't be true. Even if you think.
The first comment on this was great. If you look at the original interview, you'll see it. I didn't catch who said it, but she said she feels like she's watching like a reenactment of an interview. And that is so on the money, right? It's like if you see one of those like true crime shows, and it's kind of like low budget reenactments where they just kind of like half do it, which is fun. It can be fun, right? Not to criticize them, but it's like that. It's just like a low budget reenactment of an interview, but it's a real interview. It's crazy.
That I'm lying. You still couldn't tell me, look me in the eye and tell me that you think on social media there's been a fair representation.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the...
Notice she does not answer any questions. None of her answers were to the question that she was asked. She talks in circles, she changes the subject, and again, you know, most of my videos are about Meghan Markle, but with her too, both of them had the benefit of the doubt. Like, those of you who aren't in the States, the first thing we heard about Meghan Markle was, oh, she faced all this stuff for like several years before the truth came out. Same thing. The first thing we heard was Johnny Depp is evil, he's abusive, and he was removed from a movie. So she got the benefit of the doubt for years. So then turning it and flipping it around to it's all the media, everyone was against me. It's basically someone who was a liar, who was evil, who did horrible things, and luckily, eventually the public figured it out, which doesn't always happen.
elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
After the 6-week trial, the jury found Heard defamed Depp in a 2018 Washington Post op-ed in which she wrote she was a public figure representing domestic abuse. She never mentioned her ex-husband by name. Depp denied the abuse allegations and...
Isn't the Washington Post owned by Jeff Bezos, by the way? And it's funny, I've read I'll occasionally look at articles from it. It is such garbage, and it's hilarious because isn't it like, I don't try and get too political, but it's like a very far left publication, right? But it's owned by Jeff Bezos. So I think a lot of the times it's, designed to get people divisive. Like that article was like men versus women, because I think that was a thing. Instead of good people versus bad people, right? It's like, everyone who's accused of abuse is an abuser. Whereas no, the reality is there are abusers that are awful. People could be any gender and be abusive. People could be any gender and lie. It should be everyone together. Good people versus bad people. But again, I think the Washington Post is one of those papers that was focused on separating people and people fighting each other so that Jeff Bezos could just control, be the richest person in the world, and every business shuts down, they take over every business while people fight each other.
Heard won just one of 3 claims in her countersuit against her ex-husband. That verdict came less than 2 years after a judge ruled against Depp in a similar case in the UK, in which he sued a British newspaper that called him a wife-beater.
There was another trial, handled it dealt with the same substantive issues that had even more evidence in. In fact, my evidence was largely...
Let's just say real quick, good for Johnny Depp that he fought something that wasn't true and he won. And that's good for the world, because it is bad for the world to have people lying about this. Some of you might not know this. This is actually what my mother did. She worked in domestic violence for many years, and it does happen, but that's something that's so important. It's annoying with the us versus them. Is someone like Amber Heard who lies about abuse, that doesn't hurt just the person she's accusing, it also hurts people who are actually abused. It's offensive to them. It's upsetting to them. It cheapens what they've gone through. So everyone should be united against something like this. It's not, oh, one group is everyone who says there's abuse is right, and other group says, oh, it's overblown. It's like, no, there is abuse, it's awful, and it's awful to lie about it because that cheapens real abuse, and it's a wrong thing to do to someone like Johnny Depp and ruin people's lives.
Out really important pieces of evidence kept out, done differently, handled differently by a judge instead of a jury.
Some evidence is admissible in a UK court that is not admissible in a US court. Do you think that maybe he just had better lawyers?
I will say his lawyers did certainly a better job of distracting the jury from the real issues.
For some people,
what are the real issues? She doesn't give any facts. It's so funny how we see such patterns with these public figures who lie and want to be these major victims. And let's keep in mind that it's a very specific type of person who has such a desire to be famous, right? Where they're like a low-level celebrity and they're like, I'll do anything to be the most famous person in the world. Because think about it for yourself. Would you want to be massively famous? Like where everyone knows who you are? Most people would not want that. It's a very rare thing. So when someone's desiring that, there's generally something a little bit weird psychologically going on.
they just were frankly disgusted by the whole thing and don't have much sympathy for either one of you. Can you understand that?
Absolutely. I would not blame the average person for looking at this and how it's been covered and not think that it is Hollywood brats at their worst. But what people don't understand is it's actually so much bigger than that. This is not only about our First Amendment right to speak.
But here's the thing about the...
Okay, so first of all, she's just saying nothing. She's saying nothing. It doesn't make any sense. She's saying nothing. But when she's talking about facts and all these things with social media, the thing with Johnny Depp is basically everyone that he dated prior said that he has no history and has not been abusive whatsoever. And there's a misconception. Again, my mother worked in domestic violence and knows a lot about this. There's this misconception, like a stereotype, that you have like these people who are just perfect and they suddenly commit a crime. You see it in movies or whatever. And that's actually very rarely the case. Most of the time it's pretty consistent. Like people who are abusive are consistently abusive. They're not just like they do it suddenly or they snap or something. It's a certain type of person who's doing things like that. So it'd be very, very rare to have someone like Johnny Depp who was always not that way and then to become that way when you have, film and video and recordings of her abusing him and trying to get him to abuse her, right? Aren't there, recordings of her saying, do it, blah, blah, blah. Crazy. Again, probably borderline personality disorder. I can't make a clinical diagnosis of that, but that's my guess.
First Amendment. The First Amendment protects free speech. It doesn't protect lies that amount to defamation, and that was the issue in the case.
Yes, exactly. You can't go into, the free speech does not protect you if you, go into a crowded theater and you scream fire. We get the concept of free speech from the Greeks. My understanding of what that means is not just the freedom to speak. It's a freedom to speak truth to power.
Oh.
The truth.
What does truth to power mean? Has anyone ever said truth to power? Again, maybe in the past. But I was going to say, has anyone ever said truth to power and ever had anything useful to say? Now, I'm saying recently. I think that might have been a useful phrase like 10 years ago or 15, and then it gets co-opted where it's no longer. I think it happened with a lot of these things. Like some of these buzzwords and phrases, they might have originally been used by like real causes, like real things, and then they just get co-opted and completely misused and reused for new purposes. Ridiculous. Truth to power. What are you talking about, Amber Heard?
Is the word.
Yes.
And that was the issue.
And that's all I spoke. And I spoke it to power, and I paid the price.
In the closing arguments, the Depp lawyer called your testimony the performance of a lifetime and said you were acting.
Yup.
What do you say to that?
Says the lawyer for the man who convinced the world he had scissors for fingers. I'm the performer. I had listened to
What?
weeks of testimony.
Hold on. That was the silliest thing we've ever seen. I've ever seen. Said the lawyer, like she does the most dramatic fake pause when it's just about how she's acting, and who convinced the world he had scissors for fingers? What does that have to do with anything? Utterly ridiculous.
Insinuating
Wait, and Edward Scissorhands? Was that Johnny Depp?
that, or saying
Depp.
quite directly that, I'm a terrible actress. So
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused how I could be both.
The Depp team argued that you were the abuser, that you instigated physical violence. Did you?
I never had to instigate it. I responded to it. When you're living in violence,
What kind of thing is that? Think of what a bizarre answer that is. I never had to instigate it. Like, she didn't even say, like, I defended myself. I never had to instigate it. And that, like, insinuates, like, that she wanted that, right? Like, I never had to instigate it. Obviously, we know she's lying, but I think that's a very interesting thing about her psychology. Because as far as I know, again, one of the main recordings is her screaming, going bonkers, throwing things, and telling him to, like, take a swing at her. Totally crazy.
becomes normal, as I testified to. You have to adapt.
You say you were responding, but there is evidence. There are tapes in which you acknowledge hitting. There are tapes in which you say, I started the fight.
I know much has been made of these audio tapes. They were first leaked online after being edited. What you would hear in those clips are not evidence of what was happening. It was evidence of a negotiation, of how to talk about that with your abuser.
But I am looking.
What? What does that mean? So the tapes, the recordings of what actually happened are not evidence of what happened. That's literally what she said. They're evidence of the negotiation. Ridiculous. And again, look at how non-genuine her expressions are. Ingenuine, sorry. You might need another correction on that. Ingenuous. Whatever. One of you fixed that, corrected me on that. But just ridiculous, her expressions. Unbelievable.
At a transcript that says, he says, you start physical fights, and you say, I did start a physical fight. I can't promise you I won't get physical again. I mean, this is in black and white. I understand context. But you're testifying and you're just telling me today, I never started a physical fight, and here you are on tape saying you did.
As I testified on the stand about this, is that when your life is at risk,
What?
not only will you take the blame for things that you shouldn't take the blame for, but when you're in an abusive dynamic, psychologically, emotionally, and
So now her life was at risk? Her life was at risk, really? That was it? Your life was at risk? And it's just, that's how you know she's lying. Well, that, a million other things, but come on. And as far as I know, there was never any physical evidence of her receiving abuse, which she didn't, based on all the evidence, right? So I don't know how she would conclude her life's at risk. This is so funny compared to Harry and Meghan, right? And it's this extremeness. Real quick, this is something like in the culture now. Like you hear like a thing like words or violence, and it's like there's this idea like be creative. It's like take anything and creatively find the most negative possible explanation for it, and that justifies your actions. It's like, oh, well, someone looked at me wrong. Well, that's a microaggression. And if they're aggressing me, that means that they are discriminating against me. If they're discriminating against me, that means they must be for oppression. If they're for oppression, that means they're for, taking my life, and that means I can do anything I want, right? It's just like this creativity, like find the most upsetting, most victimizing thing, and it's totally fictional, has nothing to do with reality. Anyone could do that, right? I could say, the heater's hissing. That must mean that someone's trying to assassinate me because they put germs in there. I don't know.
basically, you don't have the resources that, say, you or I do with the luxury
Right.
of saying, hey, this is black and white, because it's anything but when you're living in it.
But then there are other times.
So that's pretty interesting. She's saying you don't have the resources you or I do when it was literally her. Anyways, guys, hope you liked this. This is a longer video. Tried something a little bit different. I'll see you soon.